Long before marble temples rose above the hills of Athens, and long before philosophers debated the meaning of life, Greece was simply a land of stone, sea, and sky. Human presence here stretches back hundreds of thousands of years. In caves like Petrolona, archaeologists have found traces of early people, stone tools, fragments of fire pits, and even a skull that may be nearly 700,000 years old. These first inhabitants lived simple lives, hunting animals, gathering plants, and seeking shelter in the rocky landscape. As time passed, the Mesolithic era brought small communities along the coasts and rivers. Around 13,000 BC, people began to fish more regularly, to craft sharper tools, and to settle in places where food was abundant. The rhythm of life was slow, guided by the seasons, the tides, and the rising and setting of the sun. These early Greeks did not yet build cities, but they laid the foundations of a culture that would one day flourish. By 7000 BC, the Neolithic Revolution reached the Aegean. Farming began to transform the land. Wheat and barley were planted in fertile valleys, and sheep, goats, and cattle were domesticated. Villages grew, with houses made of mud brick and stone. Pottery appeared, decorated with simple patterns, used to store grain and water. For the first time, people could stay in one place, building communities that lasted for generations. The land of Greece, with its mountains and islands, became dotted with these small settlements, each one a quiet step toward civilization. Religion, too, began to take shape. Figurines carved from clay and stone suggest reverence for fertility, for the earth, and for the cycles of life. The people of Neolithic Greece may have prayed for good harvests, for protection from storms, and for the health of their families. Their beliefs were simple, but they carried the seeds of myths that would later blossom into the rich pantheon of Greek gods. This prehistoric era was not marked by great battles or famous names. Instead, it was a time of survival, of adaptation, and of slow progress. Yet without these early farmers and hunters, there could be no Minoans, no Mycenaeans, no Athens or Sparta. The story of Greece begins here, in the quiet villages of the Neolithic, where humanity first learned to live with the land, and where the long journey of Greek history truly began. As the Ice Age slowly gave way to warmer climates, the land of Greece began to change. Forests spread across the hills, rivers carved fertile valleys, and the sea offered fish in abundance. Around 7000 BC, a quiet revolution unfolded. People who had once wandered in search of food began to settle, to plant, and to build. This was the Neolithic Revolution, and in Greece, it transformed life forever. Villages appeared in places like Sesklo and Demini in Thessaly. Here, families constructed houses from mud brick and stone, arranged in clusters that hinted at the beginnings of community life. For the first time, people could remain in one place, season after season, year after year. They planted wheat and barley, tended sheep and goats, and stored food in clay jars. Pottery became a hallmark of this age, decorated with simple red and white patterns, a sign of both utility and creativity. Daily life was modest, but stable. Children grew up in the same village where their parents had lived. Elders passed down knowledge of planting cycles and animal care. The rhythm of existence was tied to the earth, sowing in spring, harvesting in summer, storing for winter. With agriculture came surplus, and with surplus came security. Families could plan for the future, and communities could grow larger than ever before. Religion and ritual also deepened. Figurines of women with exaggerated features suggest reverence for fertility, for the power of life itself. These small statues, found in homes and graves, may have symbolized the earth goddess, protector of crops and families. Ceremonies likely marked the seasons, celebrating planting and harvest, birth and death. In these rituals lay the seeds of the myths that would later blossom into the stories of Demeter, Persephone, and the cycle of life and rebirth. The Neolithic villages of Greece were not grand or monumental. They lacked the palaces of Crete or the fortresses of Mycenae that would come later. Yet they were the first true communities, the first places where human beings in Greece lived together in lasting settlements. They learned to shape the land, to harness its gifts, and to build a life beyond mere survival. From these humble beginnings, the path of Greek history stretched forward. The Neolithic Revolution was not a sudden event, but a slow unfolding, a quiet dawn. And in that dawn, Greece took its first steps toward civilization, toward the world of art, myth, and philosophy that would one day captivate the imagination of humankind. As the Neolithic villages of Greece grew and thrived, a new world began to rise across the sea, on the island of Crete. Around 2700 BC, the Minoan civilization emerged, dazzling the ancient world with its artistry, its palaces, and its mysteries. The Minoans were Europe's first great civilization, and their story is one of beauty, innovation, and eventual tragedy. At the heart of their culture stood the Palace of Knossos. It was not a fortress, but a sprawling complex of halls, courtyards, staircases, and storerooms. Its walls were painted with vibrant frescoes, dolphins leaping through blue waters, dancers moving in graceful lines, and bulls charging with power. These images reveal a society that celebrated nature, movement, and ritual. Unlike the warlike Mycenaeans who would follow, the Minoans seemed to thrive on trade, art, and ceremony. Their ships sailed across the Mediterranean, carrying pottery, textiles, and precious metals. In return, they received ivory, gold, and exotic goods. Crete became a hub of commerce, connecting Egypt, the Near East, and the Greek mainland. This wealth allowed the Minoans to build their palaces and develop advanced technologies. They created plumbing systems, paved roads, and written scripts, Linear A and later Linear B, which would be adapted by the Mycenaeans. Religion was central to Minoan life. They worshipped a mother goddess, often depicted with snakes in her hands, symbolizing fertility and renewal. Bulls held special significance, perhaps linked to myths of sacrifice and rebirth. The famous bull-leaping fresco shows acrobats vaulting over the backs of charging animals, a ritual that may have combined athletic skill with spiritual meaning. These practices echo in later Greek myths, especially the legend of King Minos, the labyrinth, and the Minotaur. Yet the Minoans were not invincible. Around 1600 BC, a massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, modern Santorini, devastated the region. Ash darkened the skies, tsunamis struck the coasts, and trade routes collapsed. Though the Minoans rebuilt, their power waned. By 1450 BC, the rising Mycenaeans from the mainland took control of Crete, adopting much of Minoan culture, but reshaping it into their own. The legacy of the Minoans endures in myth and memory. They were the first to show what Greek civilization could become. a society of art, trade, and ritual, rooted in the sea and the land. Their palaces, their frescoes, and their myths whisper to us across the centuries, reminding us that even the earliest chapters of Greek history were filled with brilliance and wonder. As the brilliance of the Minoans began to fade, a new power rose on the Greek mainland. Around 1600 BC, the Mycenaean civilization emerged, fierce and ambitious, building fortresses and forging legends that would echo through history. Where the Minoans had celebrated art and ritual, the Mycenaeans embraced war, kingship, and conquest. Their palaces stood like fortresses upon the hills of Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. Massive stone walls, called Cyclopean, because later Greeks believed only giants could have built them, surrounded their citadels. Within these walls, warrior kings ruled, their authority symbolized by golden masks and treasures buried in shaft graves. The famous Mask of Agamemnon, discovered by Heinrich Schliemann in the 19th century, remains one of the most iconic relics of this age, though its true identity is still debated. The Mycenaeans were skilled traders and sailors, but they were also warriors. Their society revolved around the king, or wanax, who commanded armies and controlled resources. They adopted the Minoan script, Linear B, to record inventories of grain, oil, and weapons. Their economy was organized and centralized, with palaces acting as hubs of administration and production. Religion blended Minoan influences with new deities. Early forms of gods like Zeus, Hera, and Poseidon appear in Linear B tablets, showing that the seeds of later Greek mythology were already present. Rituals likely involved sacrifices, feasts, and offerings to ensure divine favor in war and harvest. The Mycenaeans are forever linked to the epic tales of Homer. Though the Iliad and Odyssey were written centuries later, they reflect memories of this heroic age. The story of the Trojan War, with Agamemnon, Achilles, and Odysseus, may be rooted in Mycenaean campaigns against Troy and other Anatolian cities. Whether myth or history, these tales captured the spirit of a people who valued honor, bravery, and glory. Yet their power was not eternal. Around 1200 BC, the Mycenaean world began to collapse. Palaces were burned, trade routes disrupted, and populations scattered. The reasons remain debated: invasions, internal strife, natural disasters, or a combination of all. By 1100 BC, the Mycenaean civilization had vanished, leaving behind ruins, myths, and memories. Greece entered a period of decline known as the Dark Ages. Still, the Mycenaeans left a lasting legacy. Their language, their myths, and their heroic ideals would shape Greek culture for centuries. They were the bridge between the prehistoric world and the classical age, a civilization of warriors and kings whose echoes still resound in the stories of Troy and the heroes of legend. The Greek Dark Ages. When the palaces of the Mycenaeans fell silent, Greece entered a long shadow. Around 1100 BC, the great citadels were abandoned, trade collapsed, and writing disappeared. This period, lasting nearly 4 centuries, is known as the Greek Dark Ages. It was a time of decline, but also of quiet transformation, when new traditions slowly took root. Villages shrank, and populations scattered into the hills and islands. Without the centralized power of the palaces, life became simpler. People farmed small plots, raised animals, and relied on local chiefs for leadership. The grandeur of Mycenaean gold and fortresses was gone, replaced by modest huts and handmade tools. Pottery styles changed, becoming more geometric, with simple lines and shapes. These designs reflected a society stripped back to essentials, yet still creative in its own way. The loss of writing was profound. Linear B, the script of the Mycenaeans, vanished, and for centuries, the Greeks lived without records. Oral tradition became the lifeline of memory. Stories of heroes, gods, and wars were passed down by word of mouth, sung by bards around fires. These tales preserved fragments of the Mycenaean world, keeping alive the legends of Achilles, Odysseus, and the Trojan War. In time, they would inspire Homer's epics. But during the Dark Ages, they were simply stories, carried from one generation to the next. Religion also endured. Shrines appeared in caves and on mountaintops, places where people felt close to the divine. Offerings of pottery, weapons, and figurines were left for the gods, seeking protection and favor. The pantheon of deities began to take shape, with Zeus, Hera, and Athena slowly emerging as central figures. Even in hardship, faith provided meaning and hope. By the 9th century BC, signs of recovery appeared. Iron replaced bronze, making tools and weapons stronger and more accessible. Trade revived, as Greeks exchanged goods with Phoenicians and other neighbors. From the Phoenicians, they adopted a new alphabet, simpler than Linear B, which would become the foundation of Greek literacy. With writing restored, the Greeks could once again record their thoughts, laws, and stories. The Dark Ages were not truly dark, but rather a time of transition. Out of simplicity and struggle, new forms of community and culture emerged. The seeds of the polis, the city-state, were planted, and the stage was set for the archaic and classical ages to follow. In the silence after the fall of the Mycenaeans, Greece found resilience, and from that resilience, a new dawn began to rise. Out of the long silence of the Dark Ages, Greece began to stir once more. By 800 BC, villages grew into towns, and towns into city-states known as polis. This was the dawn of the Archaic Age, a time of renewal, creativity, and expansion. Though modest compared to the classical era that would follow, the Archaic Age laid the foundations of Greek civilization. The city-state was the heart of this new world. Each polis was independent, with its own government, laws, and traditions. Athens favored assemblies and debate, experimenting with early forms of democracy. Sparta, by contrast, built a society centered on discipline and military strength. Corinth thrived on trade, while Thebes cultivated its own power. Though small in size, these city-states were fiercely proud, often competing with one another, yet sharing a common language and culture. Art and architecture flourished. Pottery became more refined, decorated with black figure and later red figure, designs showing scenes of gods, heroes, and daily life. Sculptors began to carve statues of young men, called kouroi, standing tall and idealized, symbols of strength and beauty. Temples rose to honor the gods, simple at first, but growing more elaborate, with columns and stone altars. Religion bound the Greeks together, with festivals, sacrifices, and games held in honor of Zeus, Apollo, and Athena. The Archaic Age was also a time of exploration. Greek ships sailed across the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, founding colonies in Italy, Sicily, and Asia Minor. These colonies spread Greek culture far and wide, while also bringing back new ideas and goods. Trade expanded, wealth grew, and contact with other civilizations enriched Greek life. From the Phoenicians, the Greeks adopted the alphabet, transforming oral tradition into written words. This innovation allowed poets like Homer to record epic tales, preserving the Iliad and the Odyssey for generations to come. Politics evolved as well. Aristocrats often held power, but tensions with common citizens led to reforms. In Athens, leaders like Solon introduced laws to ease debt and give more people a voice. These changes were the first steps toward democracy, though the journey would be long and contested. In Sparta, society was shaped by the agog, a system of training that molded boys into soldiers, creating a culture defined by discipline and loyalty. The Archaic Age was not free of conflict. Rivalries between city-states sometimes led to war, and social struggles simmered beneath the surface. Yet overall, it was a time of growth, of experimentation, and of cultural flowering. Out of the simplicity of the Dark Ages, Greece had rediscovered its vitality. The stage was set for the Classical Age, when art, philosophy, and politics would reach heights that still inspire the world today. By the 5th century, BC Greece had entered its most celebrated era, the Classical Age. This was the time of philosophers and playwrights, of democracy and empire, of art and architecture that still inspire awe today. It was an age of brilliance, but also of rivalry and war, a period when the Greek spirit reached its highest heights and faced its deepest challenges. The Persian Wars marked the beginning of this age. Mighty Persia sought to conquer Greece, but the city-states united in resistance. At Marathon, in 490 BC, Athenian soldiers defeated a far larger Persian force, proving that courage and strategy could overcome sheer numbers. A decade later, at Salamis, Greek ships outmaneuvered the Persian navy, securing freedom for the Hellenic world. These victories gave the Greeks confidence, and Athens, in particular, rose to prominence. Athens became the cultural heart of classical Greece. Under leaders like Pericles, the city built the Parthenon, a temple to Athena that symbolized both devotion and artistic mastery. Democracy flourished, with citizens gathering in the assembly to debate laws and policies. Though limited to free men, this system was revolutionary, giving ordinary people a voice in governance. Philosophy blossomed as Socrates questioned the nature of virtue. Plato envisioned an ideal republic, and Aristotle studied logic, science, and ethics. Their ideas shaped not only Greece, but the future of Western thought. Drama and art reached new heights. Playwrights like Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes staged tragedies and comedies that explored human emotion, morality, and politics. Sculptors created lifelike statues, capturing the beauty of the human form. Historians like Herodotus and Thucydides recorded events with detail and analysis, laying the foundations of historical writing. Everywhere, the pursuit of excellence, arete, defined the classical spirit. Yet rivalry simmered beneath the surface. Athens, with its empire and navy, clashed with Sparta, the land of warriors. The Peloponnesian War, lasting nearly 3 decades, pitted democracy against oligarchy, sea power against land armies. In the end, Sparta triumphed, but the conflict left Greece weakened, divided, and vulnerable. Still, the Classical Age remains a beacon. It was a time when human creativity, intellect, and ambition flourished in ways that continue to inspire. The temples, the plays, the philosophies, and the politics of classical Greece echo across centuries. reminding us of the extraordinary heights that civilization can reach. In the early 5th century BC, Greece faced a threat unlike any it had ever known. To the east, the Persian Empire stretched across vast lands, from Asia Minor to Egypt and beyond. Its kings commanded immense armies and sought to bring the small, independent Greek city-states under their rule. What followed was a series of conflicts known as the Persian Wars, battles that would shape the destiny of Greece and inspire legends for centuries. The first clash came in 490 BC, when King Darius sent his forces across the Aegean. They landed at Marathon, a plain near Athens. The Athenians, though vastly outnumbered, chose to fight. Led by Miltiades, they charged the Persians with courage and discipline. Against all odds, the Greeks won a stunning victory, driving the invaders back to their ships. The legend tells of a runner who carried the news to Athens, collapsing after delivering the message of triumph. Marathon became a symbol of Greek resilience, proof that freedom could withstand empire. But Persia was not finished. A decade later, Darius's son, Xerxes, launched a massive invasion. His army, said to number in the hundreds of thousands, marched across bridges built over the sea, while his navy filled the horizon with ships. Greece braced itself for survival. At Thermopylae in 480 BC, King Leonidas of Sparta and his 300 warriors made their stand. Alongside allies, they held the narrow pass against overwhelming numbers. For days they resisted, until betrayal revealed a hidden path. Surrounded, Leonidas and his men fought to the last, their sacrifice becoming a timeless symbol of courage. The war raged on. Athens was evacuated, its people fleeing to nearby islands, while the Persians burned the city. Yet, at sea, the Greeks struck back. At Salamis, the Athenian general Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into narrow straits. There, the smaller, faster Greek ships rammed and sank their enemies. The Persian navy was shattered, and Xerxes retreated, leaving his generals to continue the fight. The final blow came at Plataea in 479 BC, where united Greek forces defeated the remaining Persian army, ending the invasion. The Persian Wars were more than battles. They were a defining moment. Greece had stood against one of the greatest empires of the ancient world and prevailed. The victories gave the city-states confidence, especially Athens, which rose to lead in culture, politics, and art. The memory of Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea became part of Greek identity, stories of bravery and unity that echoed through generations. The victories against Persia gave Greece confidence, but they also sowed the seeds of rivalry. Athens, enriched by trade and empowered by its navy, rose to lead the Delian League, an alliance of city-states meant to guard against future invasions. Sparta, proud and disciplined, watched with suspicion as Athens grew wealthy and powerful. What began as cooperation soon turned into competition, and by 431 BC, the two greatest powers of Greece were locked in a struggle that would last nearly 3 decades. This was the Peloponnesian War. Athens relied on its navy, controlling the seas and protecting its empire of islands and coastal cities. Sparta, by contrast, commanded the strongest land army in Greece, its hoplites trained from youth to fight with discipline and courage. The war became a clash of strategies. Athens sought to avoid land battles, retreating behind its long walls and importing food by sea, while Sparta aimed to devastate the countryside and force Athens into submission. Conflict was brutal and unrelenting. Early in the war, Athens suffered a devastating plague, killing thousands, including its leader Pericles. The city was weakened, yet it fought on. Battles raged across Greece with shifting alliances and betrayals. The war was not only military, but political, as democracies and oligarchies clashed, each side supporting governments that mirrored their own ideals. One of the most dramatic episodes was the Sicilian expedition. In 415 BC, Athens launched a massive campaign to conquer Sicily, hoping to expand its empire. The expedition ended in disaster. The fleet was destroyed, the army captured, and Athens suffered a crushing blow. Sparta, aided by Persian gold, pressed its advantage, building a navy to rival Athens. Slowly, the balance shifted. In 404 BC, after years of siege and starvation, Athens surrendered. Its walls were torn down, its empire dismantled, and its democracy briefly replaced by oligarchic rule. Sparta stood victorious, but the cost was immense. Greece was exhausted, its unity shattered, and its strength diminished. The war had drained resources, destroyed cities, and left bitterness that lingered for generations. The Peloponnesian War was more than a struggle for power. It was a turning point. It revealed the dangers of rivalry, the fragility of alliances, and the destructive force of civil strife. Though Athens would recover and democracy would endure, the golden age of Greece was over. The stage was set for new powers to rise and for Greece to face challenges that would reshape its destiny. As the Peloponnesian War left, Greece weakened and divided. A new power rose from the north. Macedonia, once considered a rugged land of tribes and warriors, began to unify under King Philip II. Through diplomacy, military innovation, and sheer determination, Philip brought the Greek city-states under his influence. His vision was not only to rule Greece, but to lead it against Persia, the old enemy. Yet it was his son, Alexander, who would carry that vision far beyond anything imagined. Alexander the Great ascended the throne in 336 BC at the age of 20. Trained by Aristotle, he possessed both intellect and ambition. He inherited a powerful army, disciplined and loyal, and he wasted no time in asserting his authority. Within 2 years, he launched his campaign against Persia, beginning a journey that would change the course of history. His victories were swift and decisive. At the Battle of Issus, he defeated the Persian king Darius III, forcing him to flee. At Gaugamela, in 331 BC, Alexander's tactics overcame a massive Persian force, securing his place as master of Asia. He marched into Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator and founded the city of Alexandria, which would become a beacon of learning and culture. His empire stretched from Greece to India, a vast realm united under his command. Yet Alexander was not only a conqueror, he sought to blend cultures, encouraging marriages between Greeks and Persians, adopting elements of Eastern dress and ceremony, and spreading Hellenic ideas across the lands he ruled. Greek language, art, and philosophy mingled with local traditions, creating the Hellenistic world, a fusion of East and West that endured long after his death. His ambition, however, was boundless. He pushed his army to the edges of India, where weary soldiers finally refused to march further. Returning west, Alexander planned new campaigns, but in 323 BC, at the age of 32, he fell ill and died in Babylon. His empire, too vast to hold together, fractured among his generals, the Diadochi, who carved it into kingdoms. Yet the legacy of Alexander remained. His conquests spread Greek culture across continents, shaping art, science, and philosophy for centuries.